The wind was already dying when Elias Kane rode into Dead Horse Bend. He was bleeding through his shirt, his horse was lathered with dust, and the sun hung low, a red coin sinking behind the desert hills. The land was silent except for the creak of his saddle and the rasp of his breath. No man came out this way anymore. Not since the Marrow house had gone quiet. Locals said the woman who lived there was cursed, that every man who ever laid eyes on her either vanished, went mad, or ended up buried in the sand. Elias didn't care much for ghost stories. He'd seen men die for far less than a whisper. By the time he reached the ranch, the light was gone. The place stood half in ruin, porch half collapsed, windmill still turning slow. The kind of place that seemed to breathe when the night fell. He knocked once. The door opened before he could knock again. She stood there, tall, calm, wrapped in a shawl that caught the last light of the setting sun. Her eyes were dark, not cruel, not kind, just knowing. "You're hurt," she said. Her voice was soft, but it carried. It wasn't a question, and Elias found himself nodding before he even thought to answer. "Bullet," he muttered. "Took it near Red Mesa." "Come in," she said. No one rides from Red Mesa and lives long enough to knock. Inside, the air was still. Dust hung in the lamplight like gold drifting through water. The house was filled with old things. A piano near the corner, a wedding veil draped over its lid, and a portrait on the wall of a man with the kind of eyes that followed you when you moved. She tended his wound in silence. When he finally asked her name, she said, "Lydia. Lydia Marrow." Something in the way she said it made the air colder. Elias stayed the night out of necessity. But when he lay down, he couldn't sleep. There was music, faint, slow piano notes, like fingers brushing ivory in the dark. And under that, a whisper, almost gentle, "You shouldn't have come here." He sat up, heart pounding, gun in hand, but the music stopped. The lamp flickered out, and in that instant, he saw her standing at the window, her white veil lifting in the wind though the glass was closed. Outside, the desert sighed, and for just a second, he thought he saw riders, their shapes silver under the moon, waiting in the distance. By dawn, the wound on his shoulder had stopped bleeding. But another wound, the one she'd left in his chest with just her eyes, had only begun. And though he didn't know it yet, Elias Kane had already done what no man before him had ever survived. He'd fallen in love with Lydia Marrow. Elias Kane stayed longer than he meant to. At first, because his wound needed rest. Later, because he couldn't bring himself to ride away. Something about Lydia Marrow held him there, not just her beauty, though she had the kind that burned quiet and steady, like a lantern in a storm. It was the way she moved through silence, like she'd learned to live with ghosts and make peace with their company. The house was strange. Sometimes he'd find things where they didn't belong. A man's hat on the table, boots by the door, a pipe still half filled with tobacco. When he asked, she'd only say, "This place forgets slowly." By day, he helped mend the fence and fetch water from the well. By night, he watched her play that old piano, slow, sad notes that clung to the air like a prayer no one ever answered. One evening, as the sun died behind the hills, he caught her staring out the window. "There are riders out there," she whispered. "They always come when the moon turns red." He followed her gaze, but there was nothing, just the empty plain stretching to nowhere. Still, the way she said it made his spine crawl. Later that night, the house began to groan in the wind. The piano played by itself, faint, broken chords that made the air heavy. Elias lit a lamp and saw the portrait again. Lydia, younger, beside a man in a dark suit. His eyes had been painted strange, half shadow, half fire. "Your husband?" Elias asked. She didn't answer. She was standing at the doorway, her hair unbound, her face pale in the lamplight. "He was," she said at last. "Until the night this land claimed him." The words hung like smoke. Elias felt the floorboards shift under his boots. Something heavy moved in the walls, not footsteps, but the memory of them. He stepped toward her. "What happened here, Lydia?" She looked at him with eyes that seemed to see both past and present at once. "Men tried to take what wasn't theirs," she said. "Gold, blood, me, and this land doesn't forget. It keeps what it's given." Outside, the wind rose. It carried the sound of distant hooves, faint, rhythmic, impossible. Elias stepped to the window. Out there, across the moonlit plain, shadows rode against the horizon. Dozens of them, silent, relentless, coming closer. He turned to Lydia, but she was gone. The lamp went out, The piano stopped, and from somewhere deep in the house came a whisper. A man's voice this time. "She's ours now." Elias stumbled back, heart hammering, gun drawn. But when he struck a match, there was no one there, only dust swirling in the faint draft. And on the wall, where the portrait had hung, was a smear of blood shaped like a handprint. He didn't sleep that night. He sat by the fire with his rifle, waiting for dawn, and wondering just how many ghosts a man could love before they came to claim him too. By the third night, Elias Kane knew sleep wouldn't come. The wind hadn't stopped since sundown, a restless thing that moved through the boards, whispering his name like it knew him better than he knew himself. He sat by the fire with his rifle laid across his knees. Every creak in the house felt alive. Every flicker of light seemed to breathe. The piano had been silent all evening, and somehow that silence was worse than the music. When he finally rose, he found Lydia in the parlor. She was wearing white, the same white as the veil that hung over the piano. Her hands rested on the keys, though she wasn't playing. The lamp beside her burned low, throwing long shadows that bent and stretched across the walls. "They'll be here soon," she said quietly. Elias's throat went dry. "Who will?" "The riders," she whispered. "My husband's men. They never left." Before he could speak, the ground trembled. The window panes rattled. Then, far off, faint but clear, came the sound of hooves. Dozens of them, moving together. Elias gripped his rifle, but Lydia turned to him with a look that froze him where he stood. "Don't," she said, "you can't fight what's already dead." The lamps blew out. The fire dimmed to embers. The room filled with that dry, bitter cold that doesn't come from wind but from something older, deeper, the kind of cold that lives beneath the earth. Through the broken door, Elias saw them, riders in the dark, their faces pale, their eyes hollow, their mouths opening and closing like fish caught in sand. And at their front, one man, tall and broad, dressed in a tattered black vest. "Lydia," he said, his voice echoing like thunder over the plain. "You promised me forever." Lydia trembled. "I kept that promise," she said, "until you brought death home." The man's gaze shifted to Elias. "And now you bring another into our house?" He stepped forward, boots dragging through dust that glowed faintly red. Elias fired, once, twice, again, but the bullets passed through him like smoke. The rider smiled, his teeth gleaming bone white in the dark. "You'll join us soon, gunman. The wind will remember your name." Lydia screamed, not from fear but sorrow. The piano exploded into music, wild, desperate, shaking the floor beneath them. Every key struck itself, hammering like a dying heart. Then the ghost reached for her. No, Elias threw himself between them, but his body froze, the air around him turned thick, heavy as water. He couldn't breathe, couldn't move, the world dimmed to a red haze. Lydia looked up at her husband's ghost, tears bright on her face. "Let him go," she whispered. "He's not yours." The man's eyes burned brighter. "Then neither are you." The wind howled, the lamps shattered, and in the chaos, Lydia stepped into the storm of light, her veil torn free, spinning through the air like a ghost's final breath. When Elias awoke, the house was still. No music, no wind, only her veil, lying in the dust beside him. He picked it up, trembling, broken, and whispered her name. But the desert didn't answer. When the sun rose over Dead Horse Bend, the desert looked washed clean, like the night had never happened. But Elias Kane knew better. He could still feel the weight of her voice in the air, the cold in his bones, the faint echo of hooves that shouldn't have been there. He buried what he could, not a body, for there was none, only her veil, a small cross of mesquite wood, and the half-burned photograph he'd found in her trunk. Lydia in her wedding dress, standing beside a man whose eyes were darker than sin. The land was quiet, too quiet. The kind of quiet that listens. He saddled his horse, but before leaving, he looked back once more at that lonely cabin. Smoke still curled from the chimney, though he hadn't lit the fire. He spat dust, muttered a curse, and rode west. But every mile he traveled, the wind seemed to follow, low, humming, carrying whispers that tangled in his thoughts. Elias? He turned once, twice, even drew his gun once into empty air. But there was no one there. Only sagebrush and sun, endless and cruel. He stopped by an old trading post that had been empty for years. There, in the cracked mirror behind the counter, He saw something that chilled him. Lydia's reflection standing behind him, her eyes soft and sad. "You shouldn't have stayed," she said. He dropped his rifle. "Then why can't I leave?" "Because the land remembers," she whispered. "It keeps what it's owed." Elias tried to speak, but the mirror fogged with cold, and when he wiped it, she was gone. That night, he camped beneath the cliffs. The stars were sharp as nails, the fire small and mean. He poured a shot of whiskey and stared into the flames. He could almost see her there, dancing barefoot, laughing under the moonlight. A sound he hadn't heard in years but remembered like a scar. He whispered, "Why me?" The fire cracked once, like an answer. Because he was the kind of man who still believed in redemption. Because somewhere between love and death, Lydia had chosen him to end what she couldn't. By dawn, the wind had shifted east. It carried her song now, faint but steady, like a promise unfinished. Elias mounted up again, heading toward the valley where the riders had come from. The sky was blood orange, and the desert stretched endless before him. As he rode, the whisper rose once more, brushing against his ear like the breath of a ghost. "Find me." He didn't know if it was hope or madness that drove him, but it didn't matter anymore. The West had a way of swallowing men whole, but some men rode willingly into its mouth, just to chase the sound of a woman's voice in the wind. And Elias Kane rode on, chasing love, chasing death, chasing a story the desert itself refused to forget. The trail to the valley was older than any man remembered, carved not by hooves or wheels, but by time itself. Elias rode through it slow, careful, the air growing colder with every mile. The canyon walls closed in tight, red stone rising like the ribs of some buried giant. The wind no longer whispered, it moaned, long and low, as if the land was breathing through old wounds. By dusk, the shadows had thickened. He saw crosses, crude, wooden markers jutting from the sand. Some were fresh, most were not. Then, through the dying light, he saw it. A small chapel half swallowed by the desert, its bell hanging silent. A coyote skull sat on the steps, sun-bleached and grinning. He tied his horse and stepped inside. The air was thick with dust and decay. Pews leaned in ruin, hymn books scattered and half-eaten by time. But on the altar, untouched, was a single object. A veil, white once, now gray and brittle, trembling in the faint draft. Elias reached for it, his fingers brushing the lace, and the world shifted. The church came alive. Candles flared from nothing, bathing the walls in gold. The pews filled with ghostly figures, men and women in wedding clothes, their faces blurred by death. At the altar stood Lydia, dressed in the same veil, her eyes bright with unshed tears. He couldn't move, couldn't breathe. "You came," she said softly. Elias swallowed hard. "I had to know why." Her smile broke his heart. "Because no one else ever asked." The door slammed behind him, the sound like a gunshot. He turned to see a man step from the shadows, tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a dark suit and a hat that cast his face in shadow. "Leave her be," the man's voice growled, low and hard. "She belongs to this land now." Elias's hand went to his revolver. "And who the hell are you?" The stranger tilted his head. The lamplight caught the edge of his jaw, and Elias felt a chill deeper than fear, because he knew that face. He'd seen it in the portrait. Lydia's husband. "You died," Elias whispered. The man's grin was all teeth. "We all did." The chapel walls began to pulse, the candles flickering, the air rippling like heat over sand. Lydia stepped between them, her veil fluttering as if caught in unseen wind. "Please," she said, voice trembling, "don't fight. The land doesn't want blood anymore." Elias shook his head. "Then what does it want?" She looked at him, eyes full of sorrow. "It wants me to remember. And you, to forget." The candles went out. The ghosts screamed. The ground shuddered. Elias stumbled backward, drawing and firing blind, muzzle flashes lighting the dark, but when the smoke cleared, he was alone. The chapel was empty again. The veil lay at his feet, burning slowly to ash. He dropped to his knees, chest heaving, as the whispers rose around him. 100 voices tangled in the wind, chanting a single word. "Stay." He ran. Out into the moonlight, out into the endless desert, out where even the stars seemed afraid to shine. Behind him, the chapel collapsed into dust. Before him, the wind carried Lydia's voice one last time, soft, loving, doomed. You can't save what's already gone, Elias. But you can ride until the wind forgets your name. And so he did. They say some men leave tracks that never fade. Elias Kane left none. The next morning, the traders passing through Dead Horse Bend found hoofprints leading into the canyon, but none coming back. The chapel was gone, swallowed by sand. Only a few scraps of lace fluttered against the mesquite, like torn pages of a story the desert didn't want told. But legends have a way of breathing where truth dies. Months turned to years, and the name Elias Kane drifted through the saloons and campfires like a ghost itself. They said he was still out there, riding the Badlands under a blood moon. His shadow gone, his heart hollowed out by love and curses. Some claimed they'd seen him, a lone figure at dusk, coat whipping in the wind, his horse moving silent as smoke. Others swore he appeared before sandstorms, warning travelers to turn back. No one agreed on what he was, man, spirit, or something caught in between. But all agreed on one thing. Wherever he rode, the air grew colder, and the wind whispered her name. Lydia? The frontier had birthed 1,000 ghost stories, but this one felt different. It wasn't about vengeance or gold. It was about a man who couldn't let go, and a woman who couldn't leave the place where love and death met in silence. Sometimes, cowhands would find strange things on the trail. A boot print beside a woman's bare footprint in the dust, or the faint sound of piano notes floating through a canyon where no house stood. Old-timers said that when the moon turned red, you could hear them together again, her voice in the wind, his answer in thunder. The wind told the rest. They say he rides until dawn, chasing the horizon that never comes, searching for the chapel that isn't there. And when travelers ask who he's looking for, the desert stays quiet, because it already knows. No one's sure where the tale ends. Some believe he finally found her, somewhere beyond the reach of man or God. Others think he's still out there, lost between the worlds, a warning to any soul who mistakes the whisper of the wind for a promise. But if you ever ride past Dead Horse Bend and the night grows still, if your campfire flickers, and you hear a piano play from nowhere, don't turn around. Just listen. Because that's not the wind you're hearing. It's the story the desert keeps telling, about a man who loved a ghost, and the ghost who never stopped loving him. They say some men leave tracks that never fade. Elias Kane left none. The next morning, the traders passing through Dead Horse Bend found hoofprints leading into the canyon, but none coming back. The chapel was gone, swallowed by sand. Only a few scraps of lace fluttered against the mesquite, like torn pages of a story the desert didn't want told. But legends have a way of breathing where truth dies. Months turned to years, and the name Elias Kane drifted through the saloons and campfires like a ghost itself. They said he was still out there, riding the Badlands under a blood moon. His shadow gone, his heart hollowed out by love and curses. Some claimed they'd seen him, a lone figure at dusk, coat whipping in the wind, his horse moving silent as smoke. Others swore he appeared before sandstorms, warning travelers to turn back. No one agreed on what he was, man, spirit, or something caught in between. But all agreed on one thing. Wherever he rode, the air grew colder, and the wind whispered her name. Lydia? The frontier had birthed 1,000 ghost stories, but this one felt different. It wasn't about vengeance or gold. It was about a man who couldn't let go, and a woman who couldn't leave the place where love and death met in silence. Sometimes, cowhands would find strange things on the trail. A boot print beside a woman's bare footprint in the dust, or the faint sound of piano notes floating through a canyon where no house stood. Old-timers said that when the moon turned red, you could hear them together again, her voice in the wind, his answer in thunder. The wind told the rest. They say he rides until dawn, chasing the horizon that never comes, searching for the chapel that isn't there. And when travelers ask who he's looking for, the desert stays quiet, because it already knows. No one's sure where the tale ends. Some believe he finally found her, somewhere beyond the reach of man or God. Others think he's still out there, lost between the worlds, a warning to any soul who mistakes the whisper of the wind for a promise. But if you ever ride past Dead Horse Bend and the night grows still, if your campfire flickers, and you hear a piano play from nowhere, don't turn around. Just listen. Because that's not the wind you're hearing. It's the story the desert keeps telling, about a man who loved a ghost, and the ghost who never stopped loving him.